Hello everyone, welcome in. My name is Everetta, and this lively pile of bones next to me is my bestie Maury. And this is part 3 in the Tide Trilogy summary series. In part 1, I summarized the Tide of Shadows event, and in part 2, I summarized the Tide of Corruption event. So if you haven't watched those videos yet, I definitely recommend checking those out first, otherwise you might be a little lost. And again, if you're interested in reading or listening to the full chapters from the game, I'll leave some links in the description on where to find those. Alright, let's dive in. The Tide of Desolation story begins with tales from the Daughter of Decay, but to understand what the hunter is referencing in this story, we need to look into her character lore first. The Daughter of Decay is a legendary hunter that comes from the DLC titled Reap What You Sow, which also includes a legendary Berthier, bow, and knuckle-knife skin. What we learn from the DLC is the hunter's actual name is Maeve Flynn. She grew up surrounded by her large family that was blessed with year after year of bountiful harvests, until one year their land grew ill, leaving May to help her mother bury siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles one by one as they all perished. Until eventually Maeve would also have to bury her mother. As she did so, she placed dried seeds on her cold fingers and prayed they brought her mother bounty in a world beyond. When the next harvest season arrived, crops began to grow from the graves of Maeve's decaying family. They grew fuller and richer than ever before. Starving, Maeve gorged and feasted on the crops until she could eat no more, and then she shared it with the birds, rabbits, and deer. Honoring her family's sacrifice and disgusted by the greed of the rotting grunts who refused to give back what was no longer theirs, she turned her tools into weapons and followed the scent of death to the bayou, where she would partake in a different kind of harvest. So, now that we know all of that, it makes a little more sense when the Daughter of Decay starts her story by stating that something is eating the bayou, and that she must lead the grounded pack in the search for its mouth. She can smell its drool in the air and feel its hunger. It's the same hunger she felt when eating the berries that grew from her mother's ribs and the turnips that bulged from her hips beneath the soft soil. She follows the smell across the swamps until she sees a bundle of spines rising from the earth. A living altar emerging from the ground, with barnacles and a stench of rotjaw, accompanied by ash rising at her feet. Suddenly, a man crawled out of the tall grass, steam coming off of him. The Daughter of Decay asked him if he needed help getting off the ground, and the man replied no, and that he was afraid he'll never get to touch it again. And then his skin ashed away as the altar breathed him in, one gasp at a time. The Daughter of Decay asked him, "You're Mr. Cherry, right?" before telling him that she wished she had met him sooner so that she could tell him some secrets are best left alone. Mr. Cherry replied that some secrets must come to know of him, no matter the cost. The Daughter of Decay asked if he thinks a fox knows the name of a rabbit it eats, or if the fox wonders what the rabbit feels. Mr. Cherry laughed as he faded away and out into another world. Not dead, or even afraid of death, judging by the echoes he left behind. He'd stay a rabbit hunting foxes until the day he breathed his last. After her encounter with Mr. Cherry, Maeve is introduced to the Drowned Pact by witnessing two of their members, the Delphine's captain, and the Drowned Rat, rip two other hunters in half. As she watched the chaos from a distance, she aimed her rifle, getting ready to take her shot, when a stranger's hand gently tipped the barrel down. The man was wearing a suit with long coattails, and with his other hand, he offered the Daughter of Decay a steaming cup of tea, asking her if they could speak somewhere less ghastly. Impressed with the man's ability to sneak up on her, Maeve agreed, and they made their way to a train car that had been made into a small outpost. The man explained that although Finch may have left this world with a shaky reputation, the operation the hunters here are set upon extends far and wide. So he's come down to offer assurance that the bounties will still be paid, and that the parties he represents would hate for harvesting to diminish. The Daughter of Decay tells him she doesn't care about money. She cares about keeping the soil free of curses, and that the drowned poison it with altars and ash. The strange man responds by encouraging her to speak with the Drowned Pack and show them compassion, and she replies, "They rip hunters in half for fun." And as the man rolled a bounty token across his knuckles, he asks her, "Did you consider they may be horrified by that?" Maeve asks, "Like you are horrified of losing money?" And he says, "No. More like the horror your mother felt when you ate the berries from her ribs, when you chewed the turnips bulging from her hips beneath that soft soil." Written on papyrus scrolls is the Drowned Rat's perspective of events. The rat talks about not being a fan of sunshine, and that the clouds are the only thing keeping her from losing her But she doesn't get to finish her thought before she's interrupted by what seems to be another voice in her head, each paragraph jumping back and forth between the rat's own thoughts and this other malevolent voice fighting for control. The rat explains one moment she's back in the bayou finding what she was sent there for, and another moment her sight splits in two, or countless amounts, and that a witch told them the land of the dead has sown its desolation here. The rat and the captain encounter the helmsman and two smugglers. When the helmsman saw them, he tried shooting the rat, but his gun was empty. The rat asks the helmsman, "What are you sailors more afraid of? Ghosts or captains?" The helmsman ran away, leaving the two smugglers to fend for themselves. And when the rat came back to her senses, she was holding one of the smugglers' heads and an arm. She then explained the witch told them this might happen, but even if their drowned selves lost control sometimes, they were doing the right thing. So, what was the other voice saying during all of this? Cold and violent, the land of the dead is with you. Let its tides taste your thoughts, cradle your ambitions, your fingers, as it strangles life from the living. Sink, sink so far it feels like rising. At the bottom of the world is the sky, where our moon makes her knives so sharp they stab, bite. Their eyes, remove them. The things they've seen, remove them. Feed them to the many thousand mouths that gasp, swallow, funnel to the land, and then it cuts off. At the end of this chapter, the rat says, "Every blessing rides on the back of a curse." And the other voice finishes, "Every shadow laughs on the backside of blood." However, the helmsman and the daughter of decay aren't the only hunters to witness the madness of the drowned pack. On torn pages pasted with black honey to an 1895 almanac, the beekeeper explains that somewhere along the way, the demented pack lost sight of their true purpose, which is to become the purest vessels of the sculptor's power. She describes the night Sophia shot the blood bolt at the Murmurstone, opening its mouth, pouring out blue light and causing the death pack to flee as appendages from the sculptor emerged as altars from the cracks in the ground. And with the altars, 4 hunters rose with them. Blessed by the sculptor, the hunters were both alive, not alive, bloated and drowned. The demented pack shot at them, causing the drowned to pair off and then fight back with weapons and insects that the beekeeper would have held close to her and cherished, but the drowned sacrificed them. Witnessing this made the beekeeper vow that the drowned would not be forgiven. To see them not carry the same respect towards the insects that she did made her briefly question her vows, but she pushed these feelings away and remembered what she was there for. A member of the demented leapt onto the Murmurstone with dynamite in his teeth. The explosion caused the stone to shriek and open up, catching another demented member and pulling her into the soil, ripping her apart and leaving a trail of blood. The beekeeper ends the letter by describing how she can feel a queen is ready to descend from the fog and lay her larva. In her next letter, she talks about the butcher's cleaver and how he failed the demented. The pact gathered together at the sawmill for his sentencing. The cowl tied the butcher's cleaver to the base of a log flume. The cowl starts by saying, "I am thankful for our leader bringing us together, but I am ashamed in his failure in securing the Murmurstone's graven path. The passage to our lords." Morgan and Midian poured out a large trough of beetles. As they scurried around, the beekeeper began to spoon blood honey onto the butcher's cleaver, drawing the swarm to him. The cowl used his crag to shoot into the swarm of bugs enveloping the butcher's cleaver, taking several shots. But as the bugs exploded from the impact of bullets, more bugs crawled into their places. The cowl explained, "We must imagine a new kind of violence. The way one creature does not stop eating another until its body is gone. See how they move? No leaders, no weak points. Just purpose, pure and noble." The demented pack continued to listen to the muffled squeals of the butcher's cleaver as the beetles continued to feed on the honey and on him. And the cowl concluded that they shall become like the swarm, find their own way, deceive, lie, incinerate, and surge until the graven path is found. If they fail, the other packs will ascend, and punishment is all that will await them. Meanwhile, the drowned pact was busy digging up a stashed supply of weapons the smugglers had buried and marked on a map that the drowned had taken from their encounter with the helmsman and his friends. While digging, the kid asks the rat if she still sees it. She began to ask him what he meant, but then the voice in her head interrupted, saying, "You can never unsee the mound. It towers, always looms, runs the rain silver, blows ash that seeps through worlds. Its weight is the weight that makes all things sink." The rat told the kid, "Oh, you mean that altar mound as tall as a mountain? Yeah, I still see it. Gonna be seeing it forever, I bet." She then asked the kid if he ever wanted to give up. He replied, "Sure, of course I do." Then I remember we're lucky. The rat thinks to herself, he's right. They could have been trapped in the land of the dead and turned into strange statues and eaten alive by myths they've never heard of, which now roamed the dead swamps. But her thoughts are interrupted when the 13th mate fired off a flare, alerting them that the other packs had found them, and it was time to drag all their fates underwater to drown hand in hand. The daughter of Decay describes how badly the drown reeked, and that she felt bad for them as they huddled in shame around their weapons and a weeping altar. Phyllis and her primal friends, sad folks from the Death Pact, the Grounded, and even the smugglers were all there. Everyone had their guns drawn. The drowned spoke first, instructing them to place their ear to the earth and listen. The daughter of Decay was the only one to do so. As she listened, she heard many hearts beating and recognized one of them as her own. The drowned rat explained, "The sculptor's gifts aren't free. Every time you touch an altar, something is taken from you. A knowing, a truth. It has grown in the land of the dead, returned with teeth to eat us all." She then shot the altar and it screeched. The 13th mate continued, "Soon you'll not belong to yourself anymore. The blood in your body will marble. You'll be trapped inside the worst thing you've ever done, and the sculptor will feed on it. It'll swallow this place whole." The drowned rat told them the point was that if they wanted to stay themselves, they needed to follow them. Or don't. They all have their own problems. Then the beekeeper stepped forward and asked where they were going, and the drowned rat replied, "Down in King Snake Mine, there is a passage by the Murmurstone, the Graven Path. We'll make for it at dawn." The daughter of Decay began to cry behind her mask, thinking of the heartbeats she heard underground and recognizing more than just her own, but also her family's. This would be her last chance to say goodbye to them. The Demented got to the mine before the other packs and uncovered the passage. Pleased with her work, the cowl spared the beekeeper, and the pact gathered to bless the Graven Path. 5 unpledged hunters were pinned by lances in a circle around the rift passage, their blood leaking into the path. The pact tossed Mr. Cherry's equipment in, knives, brackets, jars of organs, more knives, and restraints. The cowl explained to the pact that they've been worshipping their targets as devotees and acolytes, but perhaps it is the targets that worship them, so they will seek them out and give them their blessings. They then forced more unpledged hunters to go through the Graven Path first, before falling behind them. They heard the sounds of thousands of ship bells ringing, and when they emerged on the other side, they saw a great mound looming. It spiraled and kinked and appeared to be made by giants of insect kind. Lightning flashed and monsters lurked in the distant mists. The moment the Demented Pact entered the Graven Path, the Drowned Pact felt it. It made them vomit and caused them pain. They gathered a small group of pact members and supplies and made their way to the mine. They put the 5 hunters impaled around the path out of their misery. The drowned made their way through, and on the other side were met with a swampland of mazes, filled with horrible sculptures that blocked their paths. The first statue they saw was of a man making fire, followed by a herd of white bison, a one-legged woman nailed to a cypress tree, then a screaming priest frozen in white marble flames. A meathead impaled a man against the beam of a ceiling that wasn't there. Another man with a katana held back, ready to swing. They stopped at a statue of a train bent over a hill. Marching out of it were stone children holding guns. A moon-white Sheriff Hardin pointed them towards the mound. The daughter of Decay asked the drowned rat what the statues were. She explained that they're the stories and legends brought there by the Murmurstone. The kid asked why, and the drowned rat replied that they've come here so that the sculptor can find out how all of them end. In the daughter of Decay's tales, she describes the place that they're in like the navigator from the Delphine did. They didn't need food or water. Above them was a moon with a rotten black scar like a goat's eye. Ash piled up, and she heard echoes of Mr. Cherry laughing. It sounded like he was fighting the moon. To the south, she saw a mound. It was like a mountain, a tower, a volcano, and an insect nest all into one. The group then spotted the Delphine and made their way aboard. The drowned rat told them that the ship began the story that they were in. Sculptures were everywhere on the boat. There was was a statue of the captain jumping overboard, an eyeless man at the ship's wheel, and in the hold was a rot-jaw statue absorbing a stone woman. Captain Lafitte tried to board the Delphine, and his arm burst into black fire. The boat didn't want him on board, so he stood, ashamed on the shore, and watched as the boat left with the others. The boat steered itself towards the mound, and the group looked at all the statues as they passed them. They saw one of an old soldier, with his legs sawn off and a bird on his shoulder, another of someone trapped underwater in a rope nest weighed down by cannonballs, even one of a woman split open from giving birth to a meathead. The daughter of decay could feel that there was a statue there somewhere of herself, and the shadows were waiting for her to find it. Meanwhile, the demented pact continued to push unpledged hunters, blindfolded and tied with ropes, ahead of them, shooting if they slowed down. Statues of monsters blocked their way. Decayed horses, frozen mid-gallop, fleeing a skeletal giant, a tree-high horse to rule all horses, its ribs split open and sucking in the old soldiers and horses alike to mash them with its bones. The closer the pact got to the mound, the more deranged the fights became. The group pushed through leeches and waves of grunts, setting off old ship mines buried in the mud. The shrapnel stuck in their flesh only affirmed their vows. The demented felt that they were chosen to rule over this endless place, and that they would prove it at the mound under a dying moon. As the group with the drowned rat pressed on with the Delphine, they found themselves pinned in a ravine. Something big came for the Delphine, giving each person a different vision. Phyllis saw a landslide of bones. The kids saw a giant serpent. The wormbite saw a legion of knights with tombstones for heads. The drowned rat called it something to shoot, and shoot it to sunken hell they did. More horrors continued to attack the ship as they made their way through the land of the dead, and they kept shooting and stabbing the whole way, until eventually they arrived at the center of it all, met by the creator of the four drowned, the white-haired witch who calls herself Lynch. Lynch sat on a sculpture of Rotjaw. In the gator's mouth was Gar, nestled with a little girl on the tongue. They held a bundle of wilted lilies between them and laid fast asleep in the cradle of teeth. The drowned rat told her, "Strange sitting place you got there," and Lynch replied to her as the same voice inside her head that she had been hearing, saying, "It's a promise I've kept." The drowned rat reminded Lynch that she promised them a plan if she brought all of the packs, and demanded it. Lynch replied that the Lord of the Dead is anxious and knows she will win their wager. Leading away from them was a path where the Lord of Dead stood. It was difficult to make out its shape. It seemed like a man stabbed with 1,000 knives, something you miss every time you blink. The drowned rat asked Lynch what the plan was. She replied, "Erase the bayou's history, wash clean its transgressions and sins. I've channeled all I could manage into you four. Drain the rest from the mound, and your drowning will end." The rat replied that it sounded like a trap, and wanted to know what Lynch would gain from it. Lynch looked to the sky, and flicked a knife at the moon before saying, "I will have a mouth as wide as the sculptor. I will learn to hunt as it hunts, and take what it cannot." As the group made their way to the mound, the daughter of decay suddenly spotted something that made her stop the ship. It was a statue of her as a little girl, sewing seeds into her mother's fingers. She could see parts of her cousins, siblings, aunts, and uncles in the soil too. She stood there before saying, "I came all this way to share my harvest with you." She then shot a hole in her statue and watched it bleed over the garden, thinking to herself if she had tasted of them, it was only fair of them to taste of her. The shadows following her bowed in respect. She then pushed onward with the group to the mound. The group arrived at the mound, creeping up behind the demented while they fought off waves of monsters and terrors. The entrance to the mound's center was barred by a gate of beetle wings. Everyone on the ship, aside from the drowned, jumped off of it to fight off the monsters and demented. But the shadows following the daughter of decay guided her through the piles of bodies and traps before eventually pointing to a gathering of immolators at the gate. The daughter of decay took her shot, setting off a chain of explosions from the immolators, igniting the gate with fire. The gate appeared to be alive, with pus and insect blood hissing from the cracks in the wings. The Delphine rammed into the injured gate, tearing the entrance open. Shadows escaped from within the gate, free to roam whatever land they chose. But the shadows that followed the daughter of decay chose to stay with her, because there was still a season of harvest her family wanted to guide her through. The beekeeper describes the inside of the mound to have many layers of pupae. The demented burrowed into the pulsing nursery while the beekeeper stealthily boarded the Delphine. The ship continued deeper into the mound, passing sculpted combs that spiraled along the walls. After what seemed like years, decades and eternity, the ship stopped at an island in the core of the mound. At the island was every altar ever made, piled on top of each other. At the peak of the pile was a platform where a statue would be, but there was no statue there. Dodging gunfire from the drowned, the beekeeper jumped off the ship and climbed her way to the platform, stating in her writings that when she reached the top, she made herself a legend above all others. A black rain poured from the high combs, and she opened her mouth to taste it. When the first drop touched her tongue, she felt the rumbling of a queen about to descend. Energy began to flow from the altars, and the walls burst and caved. Then an egg spiracle winded down from the center of the rift storm, and the drowned opened fire, shooting and throwing everything they had at it, but to no avail. The beekeeper described the event as a molting of their desolation's lord, and that she was to be a child to it. Believing in that moment that Lynch had lied to her, the drowned rat continued to fire all her rounds into the monster, thinking Lynch had meant to feed them to the creature being hatched. By this time, the captain had finally caught up to the Delphine. He climbed aboard the Delphine, and the ship blew its whistle in disgust and scorched him with blue heat. He looked ashamed and at peace at the same time. As he burned, he crawled into the engine room and opened the boiler, meeting what remained of the Navigator in a state no artist could describe. But whatever its shape, the captain accepted it, hugged it even. This act seemed to put the ship at rest, banishing it. As lightning and smoke rose from the smokestack, the drowned left the ship as it finally said goodbye to the land of the dead and the land of the living. The bow of the Delphine crashed into the hatchling, tearing open its throat and filling its gut with black steam, causing it to burst and detonate the dynamite that remained on the ship, blowing apart the monster with the force of a volcano. The drowned rat hears Lynch tell her in her mind, "Your sins may be forgiven, though you will carry them always. May their scars live on forever. May you live to feel the unfeelable." Lightning bolts struck the altars, shattering every statue across the land. The graven path spread a cover between the drowned and the desolation before pulling them in and spitting them out across the bayou. Reflecting on what Lynch said about the 4 drowned holding all the bayou's sins now, the drowned rat thinks to herself that she doesn't feel much different than before. Rain feels cold, bullets cause pain, and that pain reminds her she's alive, or alive enough. A mosquito lands on her face and bites, and as she swats it, she ponders, "I wonder what desolate plain it feels itself upon as the shadow of my hand covers it. I wonder if I'll be fast enough to pull my gun when that shadow comes for me." After this final chapter in the Tide of Desolation story, there's a post-event epilogue that says, "A mosquito lands on a woman's cheek. It drinks her blood, tastes something feral roiling in its murk. She tries to crush it, misses. Spores infect the insect's mind, set it flying north, toward a shadow beginning to bloom." And that concludes the storyline for the Tide of Desolation. As I've stated in the last 2 lore videos, there are, of course, pieces of lore on the various weapon and hunter skins released during this event as well. But for now, I'm just focusing on the event chapters. And maybe at some point I'll go back and talk about the weapons and hunters. But I really like the progression of this event story. There's the good guys and the bad guys, and what seems like the good guys prevailing over evil to save the day, at least for now, because I have a feeling doing work for Lynch isn't going to end well for anyone. But as much as I liked this story, I still have a lot of questions. There are certain points in the chapters that don't make a lot of sense to me, like, why did the Demented immediately open fire on the drowned when they first encountered them? The beekeeper states that they had been blessed by the sculptor, so wouldn't that be a good thing in their eyes? Perhaps they found them unworthy of that blessing, or even jealous of it? And if they didn't know about the graven path at the King Snake Mine, why would they blow up the Murmur Stone? The only reason I can think of is that even though they didn't know the graven path had been opened, they knew the stone had been shot with the blood bolt, and therefore it was likely that it was no longer able to open up a path. And when the drowned showed up, they either would rather destroy the stone than let them have it, or the dynamite was a last-ditch effort to force it to open a path. Maybe the answer here is obvious, but I personally didn't understand that part. So let me know how you interpreted that. Now that might be part 3 of the Tide Trilogy, but that's not where the lore stops. Next up, I will be summarizing the event Desolation's Wake, so that we can get all caught up before the big engine update on August 15th that will bring yet another event, and hopefully a lot more lore to go over. But please let me know your thoughts on this Tide of Desolation story, and in the meantime, feel free to swing by my Twitch channel where I exclusively stream Hunt Showdown. I do a lot of solo versus trio matches and the occasional teams, and love chatting with people about the game and its lore while I'm playing. You can find me live every Friday and Sunday at 7 p.m. Pacific. Thanks for watching, and remember, pet your stalker beetle before sacrificing it in a fight. Goodbye.